Disney may be known for its magic, fun songs, and happily ever afters, but not all the good guys get a happy ending. While our Disney heroes and heroines will still live on to save the day or marry their true love, it's often their parents that end up biting the bullet. Disney's killed off so many parents that not only is it a trope at this point, but also a joke. Nevertheless, we can't deny the impact that some of these deaths have had on our characters and on the audience. So today, we're going to be looking at these deaths and ranking them, from the sad to the unfair to the heart-wrenching. Hey guys, I'm Brad from Wicked Binge, and this is Disney Parent Deaths, Sad to Saddest. For the record, this list will include both Disney and Pixar. Just because Pixar is technically a separate studio doesn't mean that they won't sometimes follow the same tropes. A few of these deaths will also be ones that may have happened off-screen, but still had an effect on the main characters. Now, for our longtime viewers, you may be thinking, hold on Brad, sad to saddest? What about gruesome to most gruesome? Hold on, buddy. Gruesomeness and how they died will factor into the ranking, but we're also going to be looking at when each of them died, such as whether or not it was early on in their children's lives, and how the deaths of these characters ultimately affected their children. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get started. First, we'll be looking at the deaths that are certainly sad, but were more mundane and subdued in terms of gruesomeness, or how much they traumatized their kids. These are the mundane deaths. Starting this list is Cinderella's father. What puts him this low is, well, we don't actually know how he died. We know his wife, Cinderella's birth mother, died when Cinderella was very young, so we can infer that it might have had something to do with childbirth. As for her father, he stayed alive for several years and was able to form a bond with Cinderella, although we aren't sure how deep it is, but more on that later. He was a gentleman. While he was wealthy, he didn't spoil his daughter, and his kindness helped shape Cinderella into someone who was just as kind. He also tried to put her well-being above everything else, and even married Lady Tremaine because he thought Cinderella needed a mother, unaware of Tremaine's true nature.
But I just finished.
Do them again.
As said before, we're never told how he died. There's a theory that Tremaine murdered him to gain his fortune, but this has never been confirmed. Most likely, it was an illness, given the time period. Due to his death, Cinderella is forced to become a maid and serve her stepfamily. Not a good deal for Cinderella. Why do we consider it the least sad? As stated previously, we don't know how deep his bond with his daughter was, since Cinderella never really talks about him or even mentions him. Yeah, his death affected her status, but unlike other characters later on in this list, it doesn't seem to affect Cinderella personally, since she never remembers him or mourns him outside of the opening narration. Because of that, we have no choice but to put Cinderella's father at the bottom. Next is James, Tiana's father from The Princess and the Frog. James had a big influence on his daughter. Not only did he encourage Tiana's cooking skills, but he also inspired her to work hard towards her dreams.
A gift this special just gotta be shared.
While Tiana may have taken this ideal too far, making work the only thing she did, James couldn't have known that. In any case, James was a good man, so when he died in World War I, it couldn't have been easy on Tiana or her mother. The spirit of James lived on, with Tiana being able to use her memories of him to help with her decision in the film's climax. Also, it should be noted that on his picture frame, we can see a Distinguished Service Cross, which is given for extreme gallantry and risk of life in actual combat with an armed enemy force. Speaking of war, we're putting Shang's father, General Lee, at the tail end of this section. Like James, General Lee was unfortunately a victim of war and was killed in a battle with the Huns. So if they had similar deaths, why are we ranking Lee a slot above James? There's a couple of reasons. First, Lee's death wasn't a result of an ordinary battle, but an ambush. The general had intended to intercept Shan Yu's army.
We'll toast China's victory at the Imperial City.
However, due to Shan Yu's intellect and tracking ability, Lee lost the element of surprise. Losing this advantage meant doom for the general, given how big the Hun army was. Another reason we rank Lee's death higher is because of the nature of this war. Instead of dying by a gunshot, Lee was likely stabbed and bled out, which we rank as slightly more gruesome. Finally, Li's death was more devastating to his son, Shang, who had expected his father to be completely fine, being just as confident in China's army as his father was. There's a reason why the scene that reveals Li's death is considered one of the most devastating moments in Mulan. Next, we'll be moving on up the sadness scale and are going to look at deaths that had an extra element of unfairness to them, making them more tragic. These are the unfair deaths. Wilden from Onward was a wizard and Ian and Barley's father. Unfortunately, he was never able to meet his youngest son due to dying from a devastating illness. Barley was also unable to say goodbye to his father, being scared and confused by all the machines keeping his father alive. We can't say much about his actual death since it's another one that happened off-screen, but not being able to watch his sons grow up and be a father to them is certainly unfair. Thanks to a spell, both brothers had the chance to meet their dad, or rather, his legs, as well as say goodbye to him.
There's no top part. I definitely remember Dad having a top part.
In the end, however, only Barley is able to do so, and Ian is never able to actually talk with his father. This is also unfair, but we understand the reason behind Ian's sacrifice, and in a sense, he still gets closure thanks to his big brother. So, while it's still sad, it's more on the side of bittersweet. We all knew this one was coming. Next is Bambi's mother. Even people who have never seen Bambi know about this Disney death. In many ways, she was an ideal mother. She was kind, loving, encouraging, and above all else, protective. When she heard the hunter approaching, she told Bambi to run, making sure that he stayed ahead of her to keep him safe. Unfortunately, Bambi's mother was unable to get away and was shot to death. This death is both unfair and heartbreaking, given how young Bambi was. As famous as this death is, we can't rank it any higher because, while still shocking, death by gunshot isn't very gruesome, especially if a hunter only needed one bullet. It's likely her death was quick, which is really the biggest saving grace you can ask for in a situation like this. Also, similar to Cinderella, Bambi doesn't acknowledge his mother after her death. He's clearly sad at first, but quickly moves on and still grows up to be a noble prince of the forest. We don't get to meet Lilo and Nani's parents since they die before the movie starts. According to Lilo, the four of them were taking a family drive in the rain when they got into a car accident. But while they don't have a single scene outside of the photo Lilo keeps of them, we can feel the influence of both of her parents and the aftermath of their deaths throughout the movie. The biggest lesson that they taught their daughters was of ohana, and that once someone is part of their family, they shouldn't be left behind or forgotten, something Lilo reiterates when Nani tries to get rid of Stitch.
Dad said ohana means family.
From what we can tell, Lilo's parents were good and kind people, and their deaths affected their daughters in more ways than just grief. In fact, Lilo and Nani were nearly forced apart, due to Nani still being young and not being able to both work and take care of her little sister. Both girls often stress each other out, not having the proper space to grieve because they have to take care of each other and keep in the good graces of their social worker.
You're such a pain.
Even after Lilo is allowed to stay with Nani in Lilo and Stitch the series, her parents' deaths continues to affect her. On the anniversary of their deaths, all Lilo is able to do is sleep her sadness away. While Nani and Lilo accept that their family is broken but still good, their situation is still no less sad and unfair. Next is another animal death by gunshot. Kerchak, Tarzan's adopted father. Kerchak and Tarzan were never close. It took several years and winning a fight against a jaguar for Tarzan to finally earn his adoptive father's respect, and even then it was still shaky. This relationship worsened again when Tarzan began wondering about who he was and whether or not he belonged with humans. When he and his fellow gorillas were being attacked and captured, however, Kerchak was able to see exactly which side Tarzan was on, that he truly was part of their family.
You came back.
I came home.
This was enough for Kerchak to sacrifice himself, taking a bullet for Tarzan when Clayton shot at him. We're ranking Kerchak above Bambi's mother because, ironically enough, Tarzan was able to say goodbye to him. Think about it. Tarzan was finally given the respect and love that he wanted from Kerchak, and then Kerchak dies like 1 second later.
That you have always been one of us.
It's bittersweet, and if you add in the fact that it was Tarzan who led the humans to the gorillas' territory, that just makes it all the more tragic. Ending this section, we come to King Agnar and Queen Aduna, Elsa and Anna's parents from the Kingdom of Arendelle. Say what you will about their parenting skills, but whether you think they were neglectful or just trying to do what they thought was right, it's obvious that they cared about both their daughters. They never stopped loving Anna and Elsa, and were willing to take a trip into dangerous waters to reach out of Holland to learn more about their eldest daughter's powers, not wanting her to be afraid and isolated anymore.
You'll be fine, Elsa.
Unfortunately, they got caught in a storm and drowned, something that just made the situation even worse for their daughters. In fact, when Elsa found out the true reason for their trip in the sequel, she was devastated. While both she and Anna are able to move on from their parents' deaths and even correct other mistakes made by their family, the circumstances surrounding their deaths, as well as how they died, far from home and in the middle of a raging and freezing ocean, put the King and Queen of Arendelle towards the upper end of our list. Finally, we've reached the most memorable deaths from the Disney canon, not just in terms of sadness, but in pain. These are the saddest and most gruesome deaths. Starting this section, we have Quasimodo's mother. While she only has one scene in the movie's prologue, it's nevertheless a memorable and heartbreaking one. All Quasi's mother wanted was safety for herself and her child, who she seemed to accept and love despite his deformity. Unfortunately, Judge Claude Frollo couldn't see her as a woman in need, unable to view her as equal due to her being Romani. Thinking she was nothing more than a criminal, he chased her down and murdered her on the steps of Notre Dame. While this is probably the tamest example of murder compared to the others that are coming up, it's still a shock to see.
I'm sending it back to hell where it belongs.
We also had to rank this death high above the others due to the impact that her death had on her son's life. Not only did Quasi have to grow up isolated with a cruel Frollo as a father figure, but he lived his whole life thinking that his mother hated him, thanks to Frollo's lies. It's no wonder Quasi had such a hard time trusting people, believing that not even his own mother had loved him. Next, we have Tarzan's birth parents. Though they may not have looked like much, Tarzan's human parents were actually resourceful and proved themselves to be survivors. From safely escaping a burning ship to building a home for them and their son in the middle of Africa, it seemed like nothing could truly stop them. But while they would continue to fight until the very end, using a gun to stop an attack from a jaguar, it wasn't enough. While their deaths led to plenty of good things for their son, from finding his adopted mother Kala to eventually meeting Jane, we can't deny the effect that their deaths had on their son. Even if he didn't find out about them until the latter half of the movie, not having them left Tarzan feeling out of place and different from the other gorillas, resulting in a lot of self-hatred when he was younger. Of course, we all know what really puts their deaths this high up. There are a lot of Disney deaths out there, but not many of them are the result of being attacked by a fierce jungle cat. Up next is Coral, Nemo's mother. Like a lot of Disney parents, it seems, we don't know who this lady is. We do know that she was excited to be a mother, and that between her and Marlin, she was more grounded and able to calm her husband's anxieties. Like many mothers, she was willing to do all she could to protect her babies, even at the cost of her own life.
Just think in a couple of days, we're gonna be parents.
Similar to Tarzan's parents, her death is gruesome. Both Coral and nearly all of her eggs were eaten by a barracuda, leaving Marlin and Nemo alone. While we're putting this death high due to its harsh nature, we can't give it our top spot, given that her death seems to affect Marlin more than it affects her own son. In fact, we never hear Nemo mention his mother, much less mourn her. Granted, that doesn't make her death any less sad, and we can't really blame an unborn Nemo for not knowing his mother. But we still feel that this element prevents it from being the saddest. Keeping with the animal theme, Koda's mother from Brother Bear is next as we enter our top 3. Koda's mother was your average mama bear. She didn't try to seek out fights with humans, she was just trying to survive and protect her cub. Unfortunately, for a bear, it's not exactly easy to communicate this to a human, especially to a hunter as stubborn as Kanai. Ultimately, Koda's mother was murdered by Kanai by getting stabbed by a spear. This is already bad, but it's the tragedy factor of this Disney death that puts it this high up. Not only did Koda's mother do nothing to deserve this, but her son Koda didn't even know that she died since they were split up. Of course, this makes the moment where Koda finally learns about her death and realizes that his new friend killed her all the more heart-wrenching.
Your mother's not coming.
Though we're putting it in our top 3, what stops it from going any higher is that Koda does get to see his mother's spirit one last time. and is able to give her a proper goodbye, which is more than what most characters get on this list. We're ranking Queen Athena, Ariel's mother, and her death in second place. Athena is only in the opening of the third Little Mermaid movie, and while it may seem strange to give a minor character's death such a high ranking, we feel that the gruesomeness of her death and the impact that it had on her family make her death one that's worth noting. First, let's look at her death. Athena was tragically killed by humans, not by a sword or a bullet, but by getting crushed by their ship, Ouchie Magouchie. Making this death more sad is that it only happened because she went back to save one of her daughters, Athena, after her tail got caught in the rocks. If it weren't for that bad luck, she might have lived. Because of her death, King Triton became more protective of his daughters, as well as distant. He even went so far as to ban music because it reminded him too much of his wife.
The king's heart stayed dark.
Even after lifting this ban, Triton didn't properly deal with this grief. This resulted in him lashing out at Ariel when she began showing any interest in humans. Without having a proper mother figure, Ariel became reckless and eventually repeated the mistakes of her father when she became a mother herself by being overly protective and not listening. Ultimately, that's what makes her death more devastating, knowing that it could have been prevented and knowing how much her being there would have helped her daughters. Taking the gold is Mufasa, Simba's father, as both our saddest and most gruesome Disney parent death. We all know the story, so let's get this cry in together. Mufasa's death is a story of betrayal and devastation for both Simba and audiences alike. Of all the Disney parents who were murdered, Mufasa's death is certainly the most painful, given that he was trampled by rampaging wildebeest. Though not as bloody as being eaten by a jaguar or a barracuda, it was probably just as painful, as well as a slower death, and that's not counting him falling off the cliff. Of course, Mufasa's death is the turning point in The Lion King. His death allows Scar to take over, ultimately ruining the Pride Lands and leaving the rest of the lionesses to nearly starve. More importantly, Mufasa's death affects his son Simba, who, it should be noted, is one of the few Disney characters who actually get to witness his father's death and see the body afterwards.
You gotta get up.
While yeah, Scar's lie plays a huge part, Simba's loss still changes him, turning him into someone who would rather forget the past as well as his own pain. Even years later, all he wants is to see his father again. Simba gets some closure, both in seeing his father's spirit and in learning the truth about his uncle, but given that Mufasa's death stunted his son's personal growth for years and brought so much heartache to his kingdom, we really can't think of any Disney parent death that can top it. Alright guys, what do you think? Do you agree with our ranking? And were there any notable Disney parent deaths that we missed? Let us know in the comments and tell us which series you'd like to see next. Be sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss new episodes of Good to Evil featuring your favorite cartoons and video games. But most importantly, stay wicked.